everyone, and welcome to the first installment of the Women Leading People interview series. I'm your host, Evangelou, and I'm so excited to be holding this first interview. This series was created because I wanted to inspire and empower women as female managers. And I've got with me Domini Hogg, who is founder of Tried and Supplied and actually my previous manager. So I thought it was very fitting as she was the woman who inspired me to get into my first management role. So I'm so excited to introduce you. And hey, Domini, how's it going?
Really good, Eva. I'm delighted to be here on this series and honoured to be the first one to be speaking here. I feel like, you know, if I've managed to empower you, that's fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of the time women don't have that. They don't have someone else telling them that you could do this and this could be a good fit for you, and just give it a go and just try. And just as a personal story, that's exactly what happened to me. So before Domini went off to start her own business, Tried and Supplied, I was part of Domini's team, and Domini gave me a call and said, you know, have you put yourself forward for the role? And at the time, I was two months into a very new role. So it wasn't even something I considered, even though I knew I wanted my career to go there later on. But I'm very glad that I did. And I find the role very fulfilling now. So thank you very much. And ultimately, this is what I want to give to other women out there. So first of all, just highlighting amazing women who are leading people and starting their own initiatives. That's the first thing. And then also to act as a little bit of educational content, something to give you advice, something to reassure you that all of the challenges and the fears you're facing are not unique to you, and that you can always reach out for help. So I guess, Domini, something that I don't actually know the answer to this question. I want to know, how did you first get into management?
Well, I think it does tie into what I think a lot of women struggle with, which is completely, not having the confidence to put themselves forward. As you were saying before, you kind of need that encouragement. I was working at a company where I was very ready to take the step up. I've always loved helping other people learn, how to do a role. So often if we had new people join the team, I would often be helping them to get up to speed. So it was something I felt that I did very naturally and wanted to take that step up. But I kind of assumed that, as in kind of, the academic world, etc., you get rewarded for just doing a good job. And so I kind of assumed that by doing a good job and showing that I could do it, I would just naturally be able to get moved into the position, like when it came up. And so I didn't really push it, and I didn't really, suggest to my manager that was something that I was interested in. And then I discovered that somebody else, a guy, actually got this role when it came up, and I was quite miffed by that, because I realized that he had definitely just put himself forward and asked for the position, and I had done nothing about it, and that really changed my viewpoint on what I had to do to get further ahead. And so I started, by that stage, I knew that I'd missed the main opportunity and in the team at the company that I was at. So I started looking elsewhere. And I was eventually headhunted for a role at a new company, where I was ultimately ended up managing you, which was a delight. So that was my first management role. And I guess so I wasn't really quite sure, to be honest, why they in the interview decided to hire me. But I asked one of the people who interviewed me what were the kind of things that they were looking for. And some of the key things that he said that I think is useful is, one is a mixture of confidence and also self-awareness, which is often quite an unusual thing to find in one person. But I do think that, I think women are often very good at the self-awareness side of things, but not necessarily so good at the confidence. And it's about kind of achieving a really good balance between those two. I think quite a good litmus test for whether you've got that good balance between confidence and self-awareness is whether you are good at accepting criticism. So for me, that I think that's something that is worthwhile kind of bearing in mind, particularly when you're interviewing, and how do you demonstrate that. The other one was, do you care about people? And I'm not entirely sure quite how I would have shown that in interview, but I guess it's something about, the way you talk about other people in your previous team, and what it how you work with them. So I'm not entirely sure how I would have demonstrated that, but clearly something came across, and they took the decision that I would make a good manager, and actually in some ways quite a risky decision, because I was put in a role which was a kind of relatively small but fast growing startup, and my role was to develop the first success team, customer management team that they'd had as a business. So it was quite a pivotal role, and involved a lot of hiring. So for a first-time manager was in many ways quite challenging.
I really like what you said about asking, or initially thinking, I don't know what it was about me that they saw and they hired me for the role, but that you had that self-awareness, but you didn't like wallow in that. You just went and asked, what is it that you saw about me? And I think being able to turn that into something actionable, because it's really easy to think, oh, I don't necessarily have the skills, but other people see all of this good stuff. So sometimes just asking the people you work with, what is it that you see? And also taking on board the good feedback, but being prepared to take the criticism. Sometimes we don't ask the question because I'm afraid to know what people actually have to say, because they may just confirm my terrible fears. But I think for the most part, you actually discover what it is that other people see. So I think that's another way that you showed that you can be self-aware, but you're also open to taking criticism just by answering that question. I also, just a side point on the initial first job, at the time, was it public and was it advertised that management role was going to become open, the one that the other guy took?
It was quite a number of years ago. I think it was, it definitely was public. Yes, it was public. But I think it was, I think it had been, I remember, in fact, there were two roles. One of them was not public. And it was more of a kind of internal team lead kind of role. And that was just offered to someone on the team. That was the one that I was kind of really annoyed about. The second, then shortly after that, there was another opportunity that came up, which was publicized, but it was more of a senior role. And it was a success director role, but less of a management opportunity, actually. And I think ultimately would have been less good for me from a personal development perspective. But I didn't get that. And the reason that I didn't get that, by this stage, I knew I wanted to go for it. So I pushed it with my manager, and he said, he didn't think that I had the experience of speaking to C-suite level people, CEOs, CMOs, those kinds of people. And I thought this was complete and utter bullshit. I mean, okay, I know that at the time I didn't have loads of experience speaking to, really high level people at big businesses. But I also knew that, they're actually, not wholly dissimilar to other people, and who, even when you think about it, your own network, sometimes there are people who are quite senior, from your parents' generation. You meet your parents' friends, and you know that, they're quite senior in businesses, and you speak to them like a normal person. So I was quite irritated by that was holding me back, and I think that's where the confidence comes in. And so I knew then that I had to leave, and I think that in many ways I perhaps had more confidence than some women do when they're told, oh, you don't have the experience. And there was somebody I was recently talking to about an application, and she was totally qualified to do everything that was on the job description, which I'd sent her. As I said, you might be interested in this, it looks just perfect for you. And I knew she was looking for a new role. And she said, oh no, I don't think I can apply to that, because I don't have the 10 years investment experience or whatever it was required. And I said, but I bet you they would interview you if you can demonstrate in your covering letter, and then later on, an interview, that you can apply the knowledge that you do have, which was really, really relevant in a practical sense to the role, because the role actually was working with an investment team. So you didn't have to be, it was a sustainable food investment thing. But the whole point about the role was that the sustainable food aspect was what they were looking for. They really wanted someone who could examine the sustainability of their investments. So they didn't actually have to be the investment, expert, but they put it in the job description, and therefore she wasn't going to apply for it. And I said, she should go for it anyway. I don't know whether she did or she didn't. I didn't follow up, but it's that kind of confidence that I think women have to accept that any man in their place is almost certainly going to apply, even if they have maybe half the things on the job description. Whereas we might kind of go, oh no, I couldn't possibly do that. And most of the time, you're more than qualified than the man that just applied.
Definitely. And there's so much data to support that and show that women are putting themselves forward for fewer positions. And I think you only necessarily realize it from the management side when you're putting together a job description and you're actually thinking, I'm not 100% sure I need all of these things that were on that old job description.
Yeah.
But it probably gives me a good indication, but definitely just putting yourself out there anyway. I would also say to anyone who's watching, if you have any thoughts, just post them in the comments below, and Domini and I will also save time for questions. So feel free to post those in. But yeah, I think definitely going for it anyway. So many people will tell you that you can't do it. So you might as well give it a go. And sometimes that works out in your favor. But okay, so you moved on, you knew that it was time to move on somewhere else, something that was going to give you more development, and you find yourself building out the first account or success management team that this company has ever had. I'm sure that came with a lot of challenges. So I guess from the managing people perspective, what did you find the most difficult?
Well, in my case, it wasn't really the managing people that was the most difficult bit. As I said before, it came quite naturally to help people and train people, and I really enjoy being able to see people grow and empower them to do their work better. So that aspect of things kind of came quite naturally. I'm also quite good at delegating. So I think that really helped. So I don't worry about if something's not done perfectly, it's not the end of the world. And if that's given that person the opportunity to learn, then that's better than doing it perfectly myself and not actually helping anyone within the team to because if you don't delegate, you can't scale. And so I think that aspect of things was important. But for me, the biggest challenge was managing upwards. And I think that's so important when you go into your first managerial position, because you're almost certainly are never going to be at the top. you're always going to be in the middle. And that means that you have to manage both downwards and upwards. And the managing downwards is the bit that's most visible. So, and it's the bit that people tend to get the credit for as well. You know, your team can actually, you know, if you're a good leader, your team can be quite grateful. But you never get thanked for managing upwards well. Or you know, it just,
I imagine you get a lot of resistance, right?
well, I see the role of the kind of middle manager as being like the kind of protective layer of so you kind of, your role as a manager is to enable your team to work as effectively as possible towards the business goal, without them realizing any of the kind of broader business pressures. So you have to kind of basically be a bit like a kind of shock wall and absorb everything, and stay calm so that your team is unaffected. Because if your team starts to panic or feel the pressure, then it doesn't, you know, they become less effective, they can't work, they, you know, it stops being enjoyable for them. So I guess keeping calm under pressure is definitely a key quality for being a manager. And the managing upward is interesting because senior management, they're focused primarily on the ultimate goal. You know, they know what they want to achieve, and then it's down to you to deliver it. And sometimes, because they're not necessarily involved in the day-to-day of what people are doing, it's not always obvious how much has to be done to achieve those goals. So often I would find myself saying, no, we can't do this. And learning to say no was one of the skills that I learned that year, because it wasn't something I was very used to doing before. But it was so important that I did learn to say, no, this is not going to be possible, and to help manage the expectations of senior management, because it's important for them to know, you know, what's reasonable to expect as well, because otherwise they can't manage the business properly. So it's a really important communication channel. And if you just say yes and then don't deliver, it's kind of even worse. And both from your standpoint and from their standpoint. But it can be a really difficult thing to do, to say no to someone who is more senior to you. And that for me, I found to be a really important skill to learn.
So did you have what was the mental preparation that went on before you had to go and say, no, I can't do that, sorry? Or not even sorry, you can't apologize.
Mental preparation, goodness. I don't know if I did anything kind of specific or deliberate. I just really steeled myself for it, and knew that I had to do it. And I think it's, you know, a little bit like being that protective layer. The other thing that I felt was that as a middle manager, the responsibility really stops with you. So you're responsible for everything that your team does. That means that you while you can tell them that you know, they've maybe not done things in the right way, you have to accept that ultimately that's your fault, not theirs. And that means that it's also your responsibility to put it right. So I think that's really important from to avoid a blame culture, which is utterly toxic in a company. So if there were things that my team had done wrong, I would pick up the mess. I would work the extra hours. I might get them to help me with working those extra hours. But I would always be there as part of, you know, we're doing this together and we're going to get it done. And, you know, I'll be the bad cop and tell the client, or, you know, it really is about you being the one that ultimately you're responsible. But the same goes the other way as well. It's your responsibility to keep the kind of picture realistic for the senior management team, to do your best, and to illustrate, what that best is, and to feedback where maybe there are challenges that perhaps they can help with as well, because if they don't know what those challenges are, they can't help. So I think what helped me to steel myself for those conversations was just simply knowing that it was the right decision, and I had no choice. I had to say no, because if I didn't say no, everything would completely escalate, and the situation would just get worse.
Yeah. And I guess it's also deciding how much you would share with more senior management, because like you said, they don't necessarily know all of the day-to-day things that are going on. So how did you, I guess, what is some of your advice for getting people to listen and getting them to understand what some of the challenges are or what some of the constraints are?
Yes, I think the other thing in terms of managing upwards is you've really got to learn the language of the people that you're speaking to, because everyone is going to have a different way of kind of approaching things, and they're going to have different focuses and priorities, and in my case, that was often numbers orientated. So it meant that I had to try and present everything that I needed to say into a format that would make it relevant from a numbers perspective. If I didn't do that, there was going to be no attention given to it. There wasn't. It just wasn't going to get, and it wasn't going to have any impact, because I wasn't illustrating the impact in the way that was driving the business.
Mm-hmm. So I think probably figuring out what your more senior management, how they're wired. So I think it's not unusual to say, yes, like you were saying before, talking to C-suite people, they're the same as all other people. I think what I find is there tends to be more of a numbers or more of an overall business objective view. But I guess, have you encountered different types of more senior managers and found different ways to present things to them?
Yes, I mean, there were different people within the same business, and I presented things in different ways. Some had to be more numbers orientated, some had to be more, it wasn't that numbers were irrelevant, but they were more able to understand and interested in the implications of human motivation. So if teams, for example, weren't working well, it was easier to kind of highlight that as a problem to some people than it was to others. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there are different ways of looking at it. The thing with human motivation and teamwork is that those kinds of people problems tend to be a little like the impact they have on the numbers is indirect, but it is really quite far reaching, and it really depends on how much the senior management recognizes that link, as to how much you can demonstrate it as a serious issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So coming on to just like, or rather staying on managing upwards, what advice do you have generally? So we've covered kind of communicating things in a way that they understand or what they find important and what they're motivated by. Anything else in practice that you found useful for managing upwards?
I think the other thing to bear in mind is that even the most senior people in a business are also managing upwards. They have to manage investors, board members, those kinds of people. And so although they may not seem it, they're as much in the middle as you are. And so I think it's really important in any, and this goes, managing downwards as well as upwards, to really put yourself in other people's shoes, and try to understand their perspective.
Definitely. I just think a little bit of empathy goes a long way. Even if you're looking at the CEO, they don't have anyone necessarily to complain to. You can probably complain to other managers about the things that are going wrong. You can't to your team, but ultimately it's what you said, is that the buck stops with you and the responsibility is with you to deal with that. So I'd love to hear, I mean, do you have any other advice for people going into their first time management role, which is also likely going to be managing upwards as well as downwards?
I think one thing to think about is, you may have heard of the Peter Principle, but it's where people get promoted into management roles and kind of generally upwards in companies, beyond their comfort zone. And it's not necessarily that it's beyond their comfort zone. It's also just that sometimes it's outside their enjoyment zone. So a classic example of this is in teaching. Somebody can be a brilliant teacher, and that's what they're really, really good at. And there's this kind of perception that going into management is a success. It's like always going upwards, and therefore, you only really succeed as a teacher if you become a kind of head teacher, or you keep going up the ladder. But actually, I think success is doing what you do really well. And for some people, it just really isn't management. And so I think it's worthwhile considering whether management is actually what you want to do, or whether you just want a more senior position or more responsibility within the job that you have because you love doing that. I think, a lot of people who go, like a teacher, for example, who moves into being a head teacher discovers that actually it's suddenly a lot of admin, and they don't actually have any contact time with the children. And so it's really, I mean, for me, the same thing was true. I stopped really having so much contact time with the customers, which was what I was, particularly good at. But I got a lot of pleasure out of managing the team and empowering my team to do really well and seeing them grow. But it meant that I didn't have so much fun and kind of direct conversations with customers. So I think it's worthwhile just thinking, is it really what you want?
Definitely. And ultimately, you have to be happy to take responsibility for all the problems that are going on in the team, like you said. So I think it's also from the manager's perspective, something to be aware of within your team. If someone is doing really well as an individual contributor, it's not always necessarily, just because that was the case with me and Domini, it's not always necessarily encouraging them in that direction if it's not the right fit for them. So offering opportunities for individual contributors to also be super successful. And I've seen sometimes people being pushed into management for, like you said, the wrong reasons. So just creating other opportunities to be successful as well.
I think you just raised a really good point about hiring as well. One of the skills of a manager is to try to spot talent and understand how that talent can be applied to your business, roles and what you need in terms of a business. And I definitely, I was kind of catapulted into this. So it was quite a, it was quite difficult to start with, and I'm not sure I necessarily got it 100% right initially, but I did find that I got better at it, and I'm still not perfect at it. But one of the key things is to find ways of testing candidates to make sure that you're not just accepting what they say. You really need examples and proof, and ideally examples and proof that are applied to your business setting. So setting tests, for example, that involve your own data. whether it's dummy data or whatever it is really helpful. And always asking for examples and questioning, you know, when they say we did this, or we did that, do they mean we did that, or do they mean somebody else did that and I just happened to be tagging along? And so it's kind of diving into those details is so important.
And like you said, spotting these things by asking the question, using your own data.
You've
that
gone
probably
quiet,
goes.
Eva.
Can you hear me? Hello? 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 Can you hear me? They're definitely.
For some reason, I can't hear you anymore. You're now on mute, I think.
Can you hear
Try
me now?
now?
Hello?
No, I still don't hear you.
Hello? Hi, is that better? No? Still no?
No.
You can't hear me. Bear with me 1 second. Is that any better? Let me switch my microphone.
Just on hiring, well, Eva's sorting out the audio. The other aspect is also a challenge, is knowing when actually you've got to put an end, sadly, to someone's employment, and knowing how to be tough but also kind, and get that, you know, get the message across in the best possible way, but also keeping the interest of the business at heart, and just recognizing when it's not working out is also really important, and, to be honest, quite heartrending. Another thing that as a manager you really have to steel yourself for. So I think overall it's not a position for the kind of faint-hearted. It's something that, you know, you really have to go into, you know, feet first, and full of energy, and able to manage a huge amount of stress that you don't know. You know, maybe some manager positions are not too stressful, but certainly in my case it was a very stressful role. And there are a lot of things about being a manager that can be quite tough in terms of the messages that you have to convey to people.
Yeah. Is that working now? No.
No, I'm afraid I can't hear you anymore.
Oh, no.
Are there any questions from anyone? I don't know if I can see them.
Is that, can you hear me now? No. Hello? Hello? Let's try the... Is that working any better? Hello? No. I can see the sound on my side. I'm not sure if it's your sound, Domini. No. Let me jump out and I'll come. Is that back now?
Yes, you're back.
Oh, finally, but Domini, we almost got through that with no technical troubles, but there was no chance it was going to happen on the first one. Everything, and yeah, I guess that's just part of running this stuff. Have some backup mics. So sorry about that. But thank you so much for covering off that well. I think definitely like having to let someone go, having to spot talent. It also stops us from, I guess, asking for more information. Also stops us from just giving into some of our biases, which we know we all have. So just asking for that evidence, make sure you avoid that. I'll give a shout out to Donia. Thanks so much for commenting as well. That was great. It's great to have you. And yeah, I think we've come up to time. So Domini, I really just want to ask, what are you working on right now? Can you tell us a little bit more about Trident Supplies and what's keeping you up at night?
Not very much keeps me up at night. I sleep very well. Trident Supplied is it's a software that's designed to connect food businesses together to make a more sustainable food system. So it's like a kind of food web that enables these businesses to better collaborate, but it also it creates operational efficiencies for primarily the hospitality industry. So obviously this year's been a bit strange, but we're now looking at meal kits, for example, as another area that we can serve, and it's really a kind of creating an environment where they can work with multiple suppliers efficiently, and gain access to sustainability and nutritional data that they can communicate to customers and use within their procurement process to make sure that they're accessing the most sustainable suppliers.
Interesting. So in some ways, this year has just given you a different opportunity. In some ways, you've been, I guess, had to look at something different because hospitality hasn't been a thing. But this sounds so awesome. I'm very keen to see more on the meal kits and how that's going to be working. But Domini, thank you so much for being my first guest. It's been an absolute pleasure having you, and very excited just to see what you're going to be doing with Trident Supplied. And hopefully to everyone who's watching, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found it useful and informative and inspiring. And I will see you next week for our next interview. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much, Eva.
Bye.